Hi, welcome back to the talks at Maison&Objet. Thank you all for coming. Excited to be here today with two internationally acclaimed designers, Tom Dixon and Paul Cocksedge. And just to introduce myself, I'm Roddy Clarke, a design journalist. Today we're going to be looking at the human connection within design. And it's something that we talk about more and more, especially as societal shifts have happened over the last 4 or 5 years, and the way that we go about our daily lives has changed massively. And I think it's really interesting to look at how we interact with design today and how designers are addressing a project or approaching a project with our interaction in mind. Before we get onto those topics, I'd like the designers just to introduce themselves. But coming to you first, Tom, it will be, you started out as a musician before you became a self-taught designer, and then went on to become head of design at Habitat, and then obviously started your own studio. It would be great to sort of hear about those early days and kind of what your first introduction to design was.
Well, I didn't really get introduced to design. It sort of crept up on me, you know. So, as you said, I started off. Well, I didn't even start off in music. I started off with odd jobs. I coloured in cartoons for a living. I was I did all kinds of weird jobs until a band that I was in took off. So I was a musician for 2 years, and then I was in the nightclub business for a couple of years as well. And the way I got into design was just through welding. So my introduction to design came much later. I was making things mainly for pleasure. People started buying them, and then later on, probably when I arrived in the Milan Salone, you know, the Milan furniture fair, that I started being treated as a designer. So yeah, it was never my intention. I often still don't think of myself as a designer, but it's been a very good way to earn a living, really.
And looking back at those early days when you were, I guess, experimenting and seeing what resonated with an audience, what was your first experience of seeing a piece that you designed and created and how an audience interacted with it?
Well, I think I learned a lot from that. I mean, you know, making things for yourself is considerably different from making them for others. And I was making things for myself for a long time, and it's only when I started... mainly when things started to be returned, broken, that I started understand, or people hurt themselves on my furniture. I mean, I was making things from scrap metal. It was quite spiky. It was quite dangerous. It was quite rusty as well. So things would come back, and they'd come back broken. And it taught me a lot about, you know, the structure of things and the comfort of things. But again, you know, I didn't learn how to do it. I didn't get taught how to do it. I learned through bitter experience in a way. And then later on, I think when I had children, I became less spiky, so I became more rounded and more soft, mainly because, you know, you're nurturing and you're seeing your own tiny little kids being damaged by your own furniture. Then that's a big lesson as well. And then later on, when I took on corporate job at Habitat, then the whole thing inverted and everything was about the customer. And that was really my university when I was working in Habitat, which is that you really did have to think about how other people lived. It was no longer an art experience that you were making for yourself. It was then a service to the people that were buying the things. But does that explain anything? Yeah, no,
it's really interesting to see how, I guess, it's quite an organic response to how people were using the furniture, and then seeing what landed and what didn't, I guess. You're also half French, and you have quite a sort of close connection with Paris and France, and your work is also present in countries all over the world.
Oui.
How has it sort of been translating and I guess connecting with global audiences, and how do you sort of find that connection across cultures?
Well, you know, I'm only a quarter French, okay, so I can't claim to be even half French. So just one quarter Latvian and half English, right? So, you know, and then I was born in North Africa as well, which I think, you know, all of these things give you your personality and give you more interest maybe than being from a single culture. I don't, but you know, my introduction to design kind of coincided with design becoming very international and global as well. And although I think I do use the idea of being British as a kind of means of having a difference from everything that you see here, the reality is that the people that are attracted to the stuff that we do are people that have got an interest in international design anyway, and an interest in mixing up lots of cultures. So I don't think necessarily you have to tailor your designs to specific cultures or how they live. That was more evident when I was working in the bigger companies like Habitat, which at the time was owned by IKEA, and those were gave you a much bigger kind of audience where differences in cultures had to be accommodated, even though a company like IKEA was trying to make one product for the whole world. They did still have to make bigger beds in America, you know, and stronger beds in America, for instance. And, you know, so there are some things which stick around in different cultures, but in the main, we've become a global world, and people that are attracted to British design will be attracted for that reason. So you don't have to tailor your product to an audience so much.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. And coming to you, Paul, you studied under Ron Arad at the RCA, and you've gone on to be nominated for the Designer of the Year by London's Design Museum in 2004. And then obviously you founded your studio with Joanna Pinho, and your work is centered really around human interaction. It would be great to sort of hear how your sort of passion for that came about.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, everyone. I was thinking about my creative journey, and I didn't come from a creative family, and so I chose physics, maths as subjects at A-level. And I remember the physics teacher getting a plastic ball and making it float with a jet of air, and I was captivated. And then he said, but I'm not going to teach physics this way round. I'm going to go textbook. And I failed badly. But it made me switch to art, design, and I retook maths. And I found that an interesting combination, because I liked the experimental side of materiality. And obviously the art really kind of complemented it. It was when I went to the Royal College, things really took off, and Ron Arad was instrumental, who Tom knows very well. And he is an advocate of following an idea, being as open as possible, and looking inwards for creativity. And that's what I've done instinctively from the get-go. Never worked for anyone. Graduated, set up the company with Joanna Pinho. But to answer your question, there's just something within everything I do where the person is integral. They are part of the idea.
And when you are approaching a new project, do you start with almost that interaction as the result in mind, or do you start with the object of what you want to create in mind?
I mean, it can come from so many different places, but I think what I'm trying to do is make that human connection. That's really what inspires me. It goes back to actually how I started out. I was making things, selling them in Camden Market. So I'd make them in my uncle's basement, go to the street, sell these pieces, and get this instant feedback from the public. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but it was just like fascinating. But really what I was enjoying was the social element of that interaction. And being a Londoner, being someone from a working class background, very multicultural, it was about that. I like design that enables a human connection and a conversation that might not happen if the object or experience didn't exist.
And you've got an installation on this week, well, for the next 2 weeks, which I'd advise all of you to go and see. I went to see it today. It's amazing. Could you give us a bit of a background into that and what that consists of?
I mean, people often ask me where commissions come from, and this one came from someone Instagramming a work I did last year in Milan, and I woke up, I just saw it, and then went to her profile, and then realised that she worked for a mirror company, and a year later I've got this installation. So it just shows actually how these opportunities can come from any direction. But it's about, I mean, I'm very passionate and interested in electricity, light, reflection. And so sort of the alchemy of mixing liquids to create mirror was an inspiration, and that's what the work's about. There's an outdoor installation that's reflecting the historic architecture of... Yeah, so it's...
It's amazing. It's an installation within Hotel de Sully in the courtyard, and you walk through, and the way that it reflects, obviously not only do you see your own reflection, but the way that it reflects the landscape and the building around you is magnificent. And I think, you know, because you work across a sort of vast medium of materials as well, how do you decide the materials that you're working with? And obviously, is that something that can change through the design process as you're thinking about a concept?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the projects exist because I want them to exist, and they come from my experience, my background. For example, that picture there, I'm holding a piece of coal, and that's because my dad came from a mining family, and a couple of years ago thought it's kind of absurd that I haven't tapped into that part of my background. So we went to the last remaining coal mine in Wales with my dad, who's 78, excavated a ton of coal and created works that are about, you know, questioning where materials come from, energy consumption. But no, there was no brief. The brief comes from the passion to create it and explore. And I know Tom does that a lot in your work, especially there's one slide here where you were burying metal underground and not underwater, right?
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think, and I mean, even this project here, Excavation, Eviction, that all stemmed from you leaving your studio. Could you talk us through that one? Because that's a really interesting story.
Sure. I mean, East London is a really vibrant part of town, and when I got there, it was affordable. There was an art scene, there was a design scene, there was a manufacturing scene, and through the mystery of gentrification, prices shot up. And it's a shame because the first people to go were the artists, and then the manufacturers. They move outside London, it becomes a different sort of landscape. Still very nice, by the way. And I was clinging on until my landlord knocked on the door. And when you see your landlord who's excited, you always get a little bit worried. And he was excited because he wanted to knock the studio down to create luxury apartments. And it was, maybe I knew it was coming, but I didn't think it would happen so soon. And to process that, I took a diamond drill and drilled 2,000 holes in the ground. And it was odd and probably a little bit illegal. But what happened was it was passion. I took out these cores and found these stones that had been buried in concrete for 60 years. I found Victorian bricks. And then that led to a furniture collection that we exhibited in Milan with our gallerist Friedman Bender.
That's right. And what year was that? That was
not quite sure. Quite sure. But I mean, what was interesting is the gallerist. He called me and said, "I've sold some pieces," and I was like, "I don't really want to sell them, you know." And so there was this again, you know, I make my life difficult.
But it's fascinating to see where, you know, a project like that stemmed from. But I think working sort of across decades, Tom, how have you seen the user experience adapt and change, especially in recent years, the last 5 years, with COVID changing the way that we live? Have you seen it shift and adapt? And
yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, I think COVID, everybody thought that everybody would change their lives dramatically, but it's kind of vanished now as a moment where people were rethinking what they were interested in. I think what's been happening over the last 20 years has been the kind of deconstruction of how you work and how you live and how you entertain yourself, which was accelerated by COVID, but was happening anyway. And for sure, people are behaving in a very different way to the way that they were behaving before. And it's not, you know, the kind of revolution that it might have been in, I don't know, 1968 with, you know, new materials and new social norms where people didn't want to be formal anymore. I mean, I think we're living in an age where the revolution is kind of invisible rather than visible. In the 1960s, because I'm quite nostalgic, or maybe the 1920s here in Paris would have been much more about change in the material world, if you like. And now we've got this kind of invisible influence on us all, which is, you know, the transistor, the wireless technology, but it's making us behave in different ways. And, you know, something that I'm interested in at the moment is, you know, just sitting and how things like maybe sofas are used in a different way, right? So, you know, previously you'd sit as a family on a sofa looking at one focal point, which would initially have been the fireplace filled with Paul's dad's coal, then became the radio to one side, and then became the television where everybody would share one experience. But now the sofa is used for homework. One person's, you know, watching a film on TikTok over here. The other person's doing some internet shopping. And people effectively want to commune still on this central island, but they're not all, you know, facing in one direction. So that just tells you as a designer, not so much that you can do, you know, a new material or a new functionality. People are still sitting, but they don't have to all sit looking in the same direction anymore. So that's kind of interesting already. So there's things like that happening all the time which don't really affect, you know, people's taste or really aesthetics, but it's just more how people behave during the day and night and how they commune, which is very different. I mean, literally, even the kitchen has lost its importance because of Deliveroo, for instance. You know, so people now snack on the sofa. Again, they might have different menus. Everybody's got a different allergy right now. So everybody has different menus as well. So this thing of all sitting at the same table at the same time has broken down as well. So I think, you know, there's a big change, a big revolution happening. But this revolution is much more invisible than previous revolutions, which tended to have much more impact on chairs and tables and sofas and just even the shape of the home, right? You know?
But it's more about the usability. And that also comes back to the modular sofas that you've launched this year. Could you talk us about, go through the new collections, actually, and just give us an insight into those?
Well, you know, I don't even have any real pictures of that. But, you know, I tend to be a bit of a slob, you know, and in terms of how I sit. I don't like sitting for a very long time in the same position. I tend to slide down, you know. So a lot of the stuff that I design is really about sitting in the wrong way on a chair. And what's been interesting, like I say, about, you know, designing sofas is that immediately you're starting to think about that the sofa has to look good from behind, for instance. So, you know, sofas used to be shoved in the corner, again, to get enough distance between that and the television or the fireplace. And now sofas can be used in the round. So sofas that can face in two ways, you know, ways of adding on maybe tables or surfaces that you can use for food or for drinks or for the rest of it become more interesting and more. But, you know, I do think people are weirdly, innately conservative in how they furnish their places now. And then a lot of other people don't have the luxury of having a permanent place anymore. I think, you know, home ownership has changed as well. It's becoming increasingly difficult for people that are more young and more radical to really invest in things like sofas, which are, I guess, number 3 or used to be number 3 purchase. You know, first the biggest ticket is your house, then your car, and then your sofa, and then people don't need cars anymore because they're going around on little scooters, electric scooters around town. They don't own a house because they can't afford to, so they don't need a sofa, right? So the people that would normally have bought a more radical, more interesting sofa, they've vanished as a kind of target group, and you may sell it into a boutique hotel instead, you know. So, you know, I think the evolution of people's finances is a big deal right now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, actually, about how, yeah, sort of things are a lot more transient and ownership is changing massively. And Paul, a lot of your work obviously takes place in the public realm. How have you seen that shift and change over recent years?
I mean, during COVID, it was quite obviously a tricky time, but we had a couple of projects that were in mainland China, and the developers were actually... They saw that there would be a need for street life and the need to bring people together in a public space. And that was quite forward-thinking, actually. And so that's one thing, we get a lot more opportunities to create these, like that we've done a project called Please Be Seated, which was made out of recycled timber, which creates these curves that go upwards and downwards. It doesn't block a space, but what it does really well is allow 100 people to sit together, and it's a really social object. And those pieces, I think, are really important, especially now, as Tom was saying. People might be living in small apartments, can't afford to buy, so the city or the street has to kind of be a part of your home in a way. And so that interactive nature of our work, I see, it's kind of, although it's not a conscious thing, as I say, it's being appreciated a bit more.
And there always seems to be sort of an element of surprise in your work. Is that something you always try and sort of inject to make sure there's sort of something unexpected?
Absolutely. I mean, if in my studio, there's a lot of different experiments and materials, and I'm basically wandering around the studio and wandering around the planet, because I travel a lot. And if I see something that fascinates me, I get that emotional reaction, and I try to package that somehow and make an experience, make a product, make a lamp, make a sculpture or public artwork, interior, that can transmit that initial feeling that I had. And that's sort of what sort of drives me.
Mm. And almost, I mean, the human connection sort of aspect of what you do goes beyond your work, because you have this real sort of open approach. I mean, recently on Instagram, you've been putting out sort of the opportunity for people to have a 30-minute consultation with you, free of charge, just to sort of bring creative minds together. Where does that stem from, and what are you sort of looking to get from that?
There's a couple of things. We're working on the writer might be here, Anna Sampson. We've been working on this book, and we didn't want it to be this sort of perfect portfolio of pictures, because guess what? That's not interesting. And I quickly realized that the most interesting part of what we do in a studio is the process. It's the highs and the lows and all of the intricacies to creating projects and getting them out there. And so the book is very raw. There's a transparency to it. And so sort of in the build-up of that, I did an Instagram and said, look, if anyone wants to have a creative discussion with me, creativity is my life, my passion. I'm not saying I know all the answers, but send me a light bulb emoji and we'll chat. And then 1,000 light bulb emojis appeared, and every day I sit there, and it's literally like I'm having a very intense conversation with my business partner about money or something, and the next thing I'm going, hi, nice to meet you. And then I have this amazing conversations with people. And what I find, and I think we spoke about this, like there's so many people out there with fantastic ideas, they're creative, but they don't know how to navigate it, and they're asking me questions, and I try to give some advice. And I mean, it takes a lot of time, but I could kind of do this for the rest of my life in a way. Like I really enjoy it.
And as you say, there are a wealth of ideas, and there's a lot of emerging designers out there. There's probably a lot in the audience today who might lack that confidence to sort of put their ideas out there. What advice would you have in encouraging them to sort of be open and to approach people like yourselves, maybe? What would you say, Tom? To both of you, this is.
Well, the problem with my advice, people ask me, how to, same thing. It's like, well, how to get on the ladder, how to progress in the design business. My experience is well out of date, right? So, everything's changed in the time from when I started. And I mean, the fact is that now everybody's in a position to have a global audience. I used to have to sit down and stick stamps onto letters and handwrite addresses to, I'm that old, right? To get a crowd to come and see stuff in London. Now, so the global audience is available to you. The means of communication are free. You don't have to pay for Instagram, right? You can get paid by PayPal from anyone in the world instantly, and you can set up your own shop on Etsy for nothing, right? So, the whole means of reaching an audience has completely changed. And people still kind of obsess about the idea of designing for a company. Well, I never made any money out of designing for a company. I did, what Paul's describing is that I just got out and sold things, which was, And I'd have sold something for almost nothing just to get rid of it so I could make the next thing, right? So my things were very economically priced at the beginning, you know. I did not consider myself to be interesting or important. I was just amazed that people would give their cash to me for something I had made the day before. And that seemed like such an amazing thing, right? So I loved the commerce. And I think often designers who have been to college do not get that experience of what you were talking about, Paul, which is the interaction with people that wants your stuff, right? And so that was an amazing moment that inspired me, was that direct relationship with the customer. And, you know, if you work for a big company, you have no control over when your ideas come out or who they go to or how they're going to be marketed or the rest of it. And so a lot of people inevitably are now in a position where they will create their own studio. And the only problem with that is how much more competitive it is than it was when I was doing stuff. But I think it's considerably easier to have confidence in your ideas. It's considerably easier to get your ideas out to a whole new audience, but you have to be original. You have to have your own voice, and that's probably the most difficult thing to teach, and I can't teach people that, you know, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, putting yourself out there and your own identity out there is terrifying. You know, I see graduates all the time, and that's kind of their biggest fear. But the interesting point is that you say, obviously, we've got sort of, you know, platforms like Instagram, where you can reach a digital audience, you know, but is it taking away from, because obviously, you know, we can see a sort of a reaction digitally, but it's still not getting that physical reaction, which what you would have had in those early days.
No, listen to Paul. He just did, you know, not only, he's just described two moments where, you know, the installation you saw in Paris came through Instagram, right? So that's kind of, you know, and he's doing filmmaking basically as well as designing, you know. So I think that's kind of interesting. You know, the designer has to become more agile, more fluent, but design's always been about communication as well anyway, but that's just so much easier now.
I mean, interestingly, the installation at Hotel de Sully, I mean, I'm very proud of that work. And you look at the people coming in, and it's a lot. But now with my Instagram, I posted one yesterday. I think it's probably at 110,000 views in less than 24 hours, and average time 15 seconds. Okay, I'm not showing off. I'm just saying that a little bit, but I work hard at it. But what's interesting is, people then say, how long is it on for? Can I come and meet you there? Some people want to buy them. And so that's interesting for me because it hasn't come from anyone asking me to do it. And I've ducked and dived, and my business partner, I mean, if you ask me advice, I think having a business partner that you truly trust and gets your creativity, and I was lucky enough to have Joanna Pinho, who co-founded the studio, 50-50, day one, clear, no hierarchy. And she respects my creativity. I respect her business attitude, and we go. And I think that would be a really important advice if you can find someone who you can connect with, and that they tend to be at college because there's a real shared experience there. But yeah, I mean, you've got to. Yeah, I mean, it is a strange world we're living in, and also there's also the two big factors, which are climate change, AI, which I don't think any of us can shy away from that fact, which is going to shake up everything in the design world, and I'm already experiencing that. And I, on the last chapter in the book, I'm trying to write a chapter about AI, and I can't finish it because I can't really imagine much that technology wouldn't be able to do in the design arena, knowing from the research that I've been doing.
But do you think,
which is quite worrying, actually.
But do you not think it'll be a collaborative approach between the designer and technology?
I think for now it will be. I think a lot of people who use it now are going to reap the benefits, but I think what it's going to come down to probably is the personality, the brand. That's the thing, you know, the design bit of it. I mean, by the way, I'm talking about if you're designing in a commercial setting, yeah, that type of exercise, which is very creative. I'm not taking away from that, but there's a lot of elements within that obviously AI will be able to supplement. But then it's going back to human connection. How do you convey that? And that's where the human's going to come in for now, I think. I think we're safe for a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, I'm just researching. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. What are your views on technology and AI and how that might impact the process?
I've got a slide right there, which is AI generated. Oh, it's gone.
The underwater project. Actually, it'd be great, to hear about that.
Well, I mean, it's a very physical... Thank you, it's come back. This is great. It's a very physical project which uses a technology that was slightly invented by a 1970s visionary scientist, architect who wanted to grow cities underwater. Didn't really work out, obviously. But the technique is about making natural cement from seawater. So it's electroplating, basically, where you're charging a metal framework with a small charge of electricity, and it attracts the natural minerals that are dissolved in seawater and makes calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is limestone, it's chalk, it's seashells. And so what happens is that you can grow this natural cement on a metal framework, but what they subsequently discovered is that you could also grow back coral 4 times or 5 times faster than it will grow in nature because of the electrical charge. So it's a kind of, it's a very interesting possibility. It's very hard to control, but I did a test in the Bahamas and made some chairs underwater, which worked out kind of interesting, but not very great way to grow chairs, to manufacture chairs. And now I'm doing a subsequent project in the Maldives where I'll be grafting coral onto these structures. And so the AI, to get back to that question, is really just more a tool to visualize what could happen in 4 or 5 years with these structures, to try and get people engaged in how these metal frameworks become more natural, more of a skeleton for a natural world to form on top of them. Because it's very hard to sketch out or visualize it. So AI for us is a great tool to try and visualize the near future, to use as a marketing tool. And then eventually, when AI matures a bit, it'll also be quite a good engineering tool to cost up the project, output technical drawings, something that has to be cheap to have any impact. The coral thing, I can mess around doing small scale projects in the Maldives, for a luxury hotel, but if it's going to have any impact, which is urgent, it's got to be scaled up very quickly, costed very quickly, and the benefits shown very quickly. So AI for me is a kind of tool. So I'm using tools which are familiar in architecture for building buildings to see if I can use them underwater to really predict a future where we're trying to save some of or regenerate some of the marine life that is currently under really, really big threat. So that's the plan.
Yeah,
and,
amazing.
It's just, will AI give us the possibilities to help in this fast enough before the coral dies? It's a race, right?
And that's where the possibilities and the opportunities of AI are so positive, and how they can really sort of enhance the speed of what we're trying to do sometimes.
Whilst eating up vast amounts of energy at the same time, which is causing some of the heat, which is making the water acid, right? So it's not a clear-cut case. So, it's that nothing is perfect, but we have to try something. And this is my little kind of test project to see if I can make anything which is of significance rather than some new lamp.
Amazing. And going back, just because I think there'll be quite a lot of sort of emerging designers and studios in the audience, when starting out and in those early days, how did you, or what advice would you have to balance growing the business commercially while staying true to an organic and quite a pure design sort of ethos?
I mean, for me, there's not one way of doing it. I think it's about what kind of creatively makes you happy. I know many people who are very excited that they sell 10,000 chairs or 100,000 lamps. That's their fuel, and that's cool. I can't, but that's not really that doesn't really kind of get me going in the same way. So I think it's a shame if you pivot too early and move in that direction. And I suppose I've just always known that every project I do, I want to be able to sit next to someone when I never retire, but you get you get where I'm going, and actually know that I filled up my time in a joyful, meaningful way. But I think it doesn't. A lot of people say to me, like, "But how do you get the money to do these projects?" And I always look back at some of my early pieces, and it was about transforming very affordable materials. And so I don't, there are ways of creating emotional objects without looking for expensive marbles, metals. It can come from the day-to-day things you see around you.
What advice would you have in sort of maintaining that commerciality in those early days? And
same thing as it's very hard to give advice. I mean, I wasn't seeking commerciality when I set out. I learned commerciality much, much later on when I joined a big corporation. I mean, the important thing for me is to create your own narrative and your own world, kind of create your own world around your ideas so that you're not just trying to make a product or a single thing. Some people have one idea and that's all they have, right? But I think the people that are successful are, create a kind of an environment, a world that they can inhabit, and that people start to recognize and buy into this world rather than a single object or a single idea. But the design word is so kind of elastic now. It covers so many different types of design, or product design and graphic design and software. Sort of engineers are all sitting. Fashion design. You can't give one piece of advice apart from really investing in creating your point of difference, because it's a very crowded. Just like anything interesting, it's a very crowded world. On top of that, the threats that we're talking about are coming on us very, very quickly. You've got to be elastic. You've got to, if an idea is not good, you've got to be able to let go and move on to the next one. And the most important thing for me was always, and I'm sure Paul will agree with this, is practice. It's like, well, I think it's underestimated, and I'd seen that in college, is that people were encouraged to do 4 projects a year, and I was like, for fuck's sake, do 100, do 200, or do 1. Why is it 4? Why is it 2 per term or whatever it is? And if you're a ballerina or a classical musician, you would practice 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day to get good at your craft. And now it seems like, oh well, if I have 4 ideas, that's enough. I see people coming to me with these portfolios that are so slim that I'm shocked, that there's not been more productivity. It's the only time in college that you've got to really be productive and use all of the tools and do stuff with your friends, and and they're not using it. Actually, I was just interested in this object. Actually,
I noticed.
Well, have you seen this? This has been made so that the microphones don't roll off the desk. There's 2 batteries and a piece of gaffer tape.
Oh, yeah. Genius.
It's been made here on site. So this is great. This is somebody making a little solution for a little problem that we didn't know we had.
Exactly. On that note, it'd be brilliant to open up to the audience and to get some questions in. I'm sure you must all be teeming with questions. We've got one at the back. Do we have a microphone? Sorry, just the microphone up at the back. There's a question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here today. My question was, I feel like we've been talking about your successes and your advice, but I think I'm interested also in learning, like, what mistakes have you made throughout your career that have been very, I don't know, revealing and giving you lessons into, your successes that we are now seeing?
Great question. Who wants to go first? Paul?
Oh my God. I mean, how truthful do you want to be? I mean, there's a lot of moments where I cringe, in terms of the mistakes I've made. I mean, obviously, I think we've made we've made tons of mistakes. I mean, wow. But I mean, obviously, it goes back to what Tom was saying about, like, that. You've got to practice at it. You've got to keep on rolling. I mean, you can't, when you're experimenting, you can't really make mistakes, because that informs the next piece. so I wouldn't see those as mistakes. But yeah, we've missed out on opportunities. We've missed out on. They're quite personal things, really. But I mean, I think it's part of it, though, right? You know, you got to try these things, meet new people, try collaborations. Pricing jobs is always very, very, very difficult, especially at the beginning. You know, I've priced a job, and then it's like a price for a week, and then we end up doing it for 6-7 months. Just what I'm saying, and you're kind of like, and you're trapped. That was a big mistake. I think pricing work is a weird, like, mystery, never taught at the Royal College, by the way. And I don't, you know, maybe it shouldn't be taught. That wasn't Ron Arad or the team's responsibility, but maybe that could have been an interesting starting point, because. And if you're working with a company and they ask you to price something up and you give them a price of $5,000 and they're thinking, hang about, that should be 50, they're not going to correct you, right? So I think we made a lot of those mistakes, but you quickly do learn, because when you realise you're not paying the bills, you have to sharpen up a bit. But I mean, those mistakes come from me starting the studio with Joanna from the ground up with no training in that sense.
Tom, what would you say in response to?
I mean, you know, my whole career has been informed by a series of terrible mistakes. You know, I kind of fell into design with a bit. I was still in the club business. I was driving a motorcycle, and I decided to look at a girl over my shoulder, and I crashed into a car and broke my arm just a week before we were going on tour. That was a big mistake. And that ended my music career. I was going to be a pop star, right? So that was a big mistake. And then, you know, so even some of the, but it was the, you know, it was in the end it turned out okay. Yeah. You know, being an aging rock star is not that elegant, right? So, and then you know, there's lots of designs that have been informed by mistakes. You know, there's a thing in engineering called testing to destruction, which I love, right? Which is, so you know, I had this idea that I was going to make the lightest chair in the world. And it was made out of very thin metal rods. And I think I managed to do it. And I could sit on this chair, and it was great. It was called the pylon chair. I thought it was very, you know, very clever. It taught me a lot about welding, a lot about structure and the rest of it. But I sold a whole set of 8 to a much larger American client, and he sat on them, and they just collapsed, you know. So, but then it allowed me to reinforce the chair and make it better. And then I learned how to push the chair down to try and work out where the weak points were. And I became a much better engineer, a much better manufacturer as a result of the mistakes that I'd made earlier. So I think the mistakes inform your whole career. And if you're scared of making mistakes, I think that will really get in the way. You know, I know a lot of people that are perfectionists, and I'm really not a perfectionist. And sometimes it cripples them, you know.
But it must shake your confidence in those moments.
No. I mean, you know, again, I don't, you know, I guess we probably share a recklessness. You can see with Paul's studio. I mean, that's crazy, right? Drilling holes into the floor of his studio, but then making something from a disaster that was going to happen to him. And you know, that could have been a bad mistake. Maybe it would never have made a great table, but it's made something with a really great narrative. And because Paul, I don't think Paul is scared of making mistakes. I just don't think he is.
I think also in terms of what I notice, especially we do limited edition pieces with galleries, and what they like is when you show a mistake, you show the roughness, the texture, the mark of the human, you know, and that's, again, a perfectionist might say, oh no, it needs to be perfect when it comes out of the mold or something similar. And I think there is a thirst for that if the question is more about the making side of things. I would embrace the mistake, let's say, and ask someone what they think of it. I reckon it's a nice entry point to the material itself.
When we talk about human connection, there's nothing more relatable than a mistake, is there? When we talk about connections between humans. No, it's fascinating. Do we have any other questions? We've probably got time for one or maybe two more. There's one just here.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It was interesting so much. And questions is, what was your first successful project what you think a project that give you new opportunity, for example, like that, new level, give you new level, new horizon. Thank you.
Do you want to go, Tom?
That's quite a difficult question because I think things don't happen in moments like a single thing. They sort of happen in a kind of progression. I mean, you know, I have a chair that ended up in you know, I've got a chair that's followed me in my whole career, but I've never been happy with it. You know, it's always been thinking I can do better than this, and I constantly tinker with it and improve it. It's called the S chair, and I made it first in rubber from recycled inner tube, and then I made it in straw, and then I made it in foam, and it's ended up in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is kind of fabulous because I love museums, right? But it's not a moment. It was a kind of like, you know, a kind of flow of a build and a flow, and I don't think successes happen in these kind of like, it's not like the Olympics, which is happening here, where you win. You know, it's kind of you know, you build a kind of progression of something which you're not very sure. But I think quite a lot of designers are never really happy with what they've got and the moment. They just want the next moment, the next success, and you're always kind of trying to reach that, you know, reach the unreachable, and that's what keeps you progressing. Is like you're thinking, right, okay, I know what I can do to make something I'm really proud of, and I haven't done it yet. You know, I'm still kind of trying to reach it.
It's amazing. Paul, what would you say?
I mean, there's one of my last projects when I was at the Royal College was informed by not having much cash, but also being fascinated with the polystyrene cup. And you know, there's a lot of people sort of amazing drawers, and they were thinking about the end result. And I took the cup and placed it in my oven. And it's a shame I can't show you the video, but you inject heat into a cup, and it starts to move and dance. It transforms. It shrunk. It became hard. I built these lamps, and it was a powerful experience for me. And those lamps I was selling them to pay for my rent, and it just helped me survive, actually. And it just came from that serendipitous moment of, I wonder what would happen if I did this, and I filmed it. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is just realizing that, you know, being passionate, communicating your own voice, I think people respond to that, and they want to be around people and go on a creative journey with someone who they think is telling the truth, and that's something that I try and do.
Amazing. Probably time for one final question. There's one at the back.
Hello, brilliant talk. I run a designers program in Edinburgh, Scotland, where we have designers respond to exhibitions in the Contemporary Art Gallery that we're in. But it often results in makers kind of in both art and design at the same time. And it'd be really interesting to hear you talk about how you approach art and design at the same time, especially with a gallerist and doing commissions.
Do you want to take that one, Paul?
I mean, it's a fascinating sort of blur for me at the moment, and it's interesting to hear people describe the work that we do as a studio. Some say it's design, some say it's art. For me, I'm not necessarily bothered about the label, but I think when I visit my artist friends in London, their studios probably look a bit like mine, versus when I go to see my industrial design friends. And so, but I don't, you know, I just approach every project in an open way, and as I said at the beginning, I allow the idea to take me on that creative journey. And I have done industrial design pieces where I've been in China. I mass-produced an electronic music piece, which I crowdfunded on Kickstarter, because the idea took me there. But then I've also done pieces which I know there's a table that comes up on the slides, which is a 20 mil rolled piece of steel, which weighs over half a ton. which obviously can't be sold in this hall because it's impractical, it's heavy, it's expensive, and all those types of things, and therefore expensive to make as well. And so it needs another place to show it. So yeah, simple answer. I allow the idea to take me on that journey.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on the crossover between art and design?
I don't know. You know, the people that run galleries or auction houses have tried to make design into art, but the value system is so very different, and the way that you explain the two disciplines is so different that I've struggled to where I agree with Paul that, you know, for practitioners it's a very blurry, you know, divide. In terms of commerce, it's completely different. You only have to see that the prices for design don't really exist until you're very dead. You know, so Charlotte Perriand or Eileen Gray might reach, you know, the $1 million mark. Mark Newson has managed to do it with an art gallery supporting his output, but there's nobody else really that's making the money that artists make, you know. And even you know, the Perriand pieces are not the same as a Brancusi piece, for instance, you know. So the value system is completely different. The way that you show them is completely different. And although I work, you know, just like Paul does, much more like a sculptor, making maquettes and having a messy studio and the rest of it, the reality is I'll never be an artist unless I take it out of the functionality realm and put it firmly into the non-functionality realm and supported by the value system of the art galleries and the conceptual art. In a way, I think that's a reasonable divide. The functional and the non-functional art isn't there to function. It's to explain things or to celebrate things or to, you know, it's a visual feast. It's not for using as an object, whereas design in principle should have some kind of function. So I see a clean divide. What's nice about working in art galleries though is that they can explain things properly. You've got a lot of big white space. What's not so nice about design is kind of what you see here, is that it's such a vegetable soup of different ideas all crammed together that I think we all would rather show in an art gallery, just so that we can explain the concept better and the ideas behind it. I mean, they're both totally legitimate, you know, channels, but for me, they've never really crossed over in the same way. But whenever I'm shown in an art context, I'm very, very happy, yeah.
That's amazing. But yeah, as I say, it's all about narrative, isn't it, with art and exploring.
Value.
Yeah. Thank you so much to Paul and Tom for your insight, and thank you to everyone for coming.